So today's chapter, called The Son of Poseidon, um, is a prequel to those chapters. And it took place the last semester of my senior year. And the night after I graduated, we were on our way to Europe. So it was the as close a prequel as you could get to anything. Um, and since college is in full swing now all around us, it seemed appropriate to me to read about a college. So, The Son of Poseidon. And let me know if my voice isn't loud enough, so I will project. Very good. Along with archly philosophical my friend Dan, I had another particularly close undergraduate friend, Matteo. Matty, as we called him, was a totally different character from the quiet and ironic scholar Dan, with his passion for German literature and existential angst. Struttingly self-confident, a gifted writer as well as singularly successful with young ladies from both Radcliffe and farther-flung New England colleges, Matty was also a darling of professors, including famous authors drawn to the prestige of a Harvard visiting professorship. Matty achieved further college years renowned as a director at the newly finished Loeb Drama Center on Brattle Street, a short walk from the eponymous movie theater, Brattle, where the hard edges of exam week were softened by screenings of Humphrey Bogart movies. We all came out whistling. My personal theatrical triumph under Matteo's direction was a non-speaking part as a woodman in Lorca's Blood Wedding poem, a, a performance flirtatiously admired by a dark-eyed Cliffy with whom I was profoundly smitten, although we never quite connected, as we walked the dark Cambridge lanes back to her dorm. Now, among Matteo's several amours was Sarah, a dark-haired lass pursuing her studies at a distant New England alma mater, and whom one mild autumn afternoon I was startled to see exiting the gateway of the upperclassmen college where Matteo and I both lived. Alas, dark clouds did lower about her sweet brow. "Jimmy," she cried out, "so glad to see you." Ritual hug. "Have you seen Matty?" As it turned out, though I hadn't actually seen Matty, I knew he was on his way to an assignation with a Cliffy from Stockholm, famed as a younger version of Anita Ekberg, a goddess among women in the eyes of fantasies of male undergraduates. "Haven't seen him since this morning," was my truthful reply. Beneath her crown of auburn curls, Sarah's lovely face darkened, eyes scanning the distance like drumming fingers. "How are you?" I lamely asked. Above her silk scarf and fulsome sweater, she turned her head back towards me and snorted. There ensued a conversation, details of which I no longer recall, but to cut, as we say, to the chase, picture this. The two of us somehow seated in my British sports car, cruising the highway that led to the Sagamore Bridge and beyond to Cape Cod, whose sweet arm left by ancient glaciers arcs into the waves of the North Atlantic. To my surprise, Sarah had invited me to visit and spend the night at her parents' home in one of the charming villages of the Outer Cape. Though she was understandably steamed, having come a fair piece of highway to see Matteo in Cambridge, this was an astonishing circumstance in which to find myself, even more surprising for her to have created. Now, I can't claim total innocence, as I had probably mentioned that I had a car parked in the business school lot across the Charles River, which brings us to the fundamental issue of this chapter. Is all really fair in love and war? Weaving through Boston rush hour traffic, our conversation was as staticky as the music on the radio. But finally breasting the city limits, we made our way more smoothly southward toward the Sagamore Bridge, a fine Depression-era construct of the Army Corps of Engineers, vaulting over the Cape Cod Canal, dug years before by the same Corps, permitting boats to pass under along an inland waterway without having to circumvent the whole Cape itself. Once beyond the thrilling crest of the bridge and safely onto the Cape, Sarah's spirits noticeably brightened. Evening now having fallen, we glided past the exit to Hyannis when she suddenly asked, "Can I drive?" It was really less a question than an announcement as to what was about to happen. We are speaking here of my treasured racing red, 3 on the floor convertible dual carbs as seen in a James Bond movie vehicle, which in subsequent decades was acclaimed and remains a classic of its type. It was a Sunbeam Alpine, for those of you who know.
I can't hear you. What?
What?
The last one you just say.
Oh, it's called the car was called a Sunbeam Alpine. It's very elegantly trucked out. Okay, so it remains a classic of its type. And well, however it transpired, she had gifted me with her invitation to this adventure. "Can you drive a stick shift?" was my last ditch encounter. Her eyebrows contracted slightly at the idiotic insinuation. Once behind the wheel, she took to the road as if she owned it. Flying down the spinal artery of Route 6, we whirled on the verge of catastrophe around the circle at Orleans, a locale like Hyannis offering superb pastries. On our way to her parents' home on the outer Cape in the all-enrobing darkness of night, with the mysterious Atlantic heaving beyond the dunes. Ulysses, on his return to Ithaca, finally crossed the swells of the wine-dark Mediterranean to unite with his loving wife Penelope. But I was only not headed home, but instead sailing toward her home, barely knowing her, not knowing her parents at all. Could this be the goddess Calypso offering me immortality? On sleepless night reruns of this adventure on the IMAX of my inner skull, I have imagined stopping the car, folding down the convertible top, raising up the windows, turning the heater and radio full so that we could ride open to the night, her hair streaming out behind her. Clearly, it was already streaming in spirit, if not in fact. Moments before reaching our destination, however, she made a sudden left turn off the highway, winding down the dark streets of sleeping summer homes to reach a broad wooden dock of a town harbor. All was shadows and stars, not another soul stirring. In the fullness of time, I have enjoyed my share of romance with sweet ladies of different styles and ages, a micro version of Don Giovanni's catalog for the betrayed Donna Anna. Not that such romantic moments didn't also include some truly memorable disasters. On that starlit night by the bay, just we two, the only sound other than her soft breathing was the water lapping against the black, seaweed-slippery pilings of the dock. The moment had come to lean in for a kiss and whatever delights might follow. Meeting her surprised parents on a first date, no less, which might become a life-changing event, all tenderness and wedding cake bliss, upon which we would always look back fondly. Don't know why I didn't, as Nora Jones sings. In any case, the chance slipped away. Was this an issue of my friendship with Matteo? or a too sudden opportunity, or an insecurity born of the experience of youth, whatever, as we say now, it's lost in the ever receding past. Arrived at her house, I'm not certain they knew we were coming. Eventually, we bid an awkward goodnight to her politely curious parents. However, sensing the possibility of reigniting that moment on the dock, I did allow some time to let the situation all settle before creeping out of the guest room to which I had been assigned and moving, quiet as a kitten, to Sarah's room. Settling myself on her startled bedside, I gently slipped my hand under the covers and, oh, so clearly not appreciated. I quickly withdrew hand from the covers and myself from her room and scampered more like a scalded cat back to my bed. The following morning was the coldest breakfast of all my life. If Sarah and I even exchanged words on the drive back, I blocked it out. But words? There were words aplenty later that day with Matteo, risen to a state of characteristically dramatic, it barely contained fury, rage, as the first word of the Iliad would have it. Beneath a heavy gray sky, seagulls screaming in distressed augury above the bare branches of the sycamore trees at the corner of Harvard Street and Memorial Drive, Matteo steamed and stamped like an enraged bull. With his olive-complected skin, there was a bit of the matador about him, redolent of a pouting Il Duce at the height of his operatic powers. How could you, he bellowed, hands on hips. Gently as possible, I pointed to a certain irony in the situation, what with the sweetest demoiselle and all, but he was not to be derailed. In retrospect, I might have tried an Updike opening and appealed to his writerly side by citing perchance Aristotle's observation that speech, all speech, is the representation of the experiences of the mind, or alternately, that all languages not invented or reclaimed are all of the same age, winding back to a protozoan source of cries and grunts. Or as the philosopher Wilhelm von Humboldt wrote, languages differ not because of sound, but in their unique and complete Weltansichten, how the world is seen and understood, but probably to no effect. So I suffered his cries and groans in silence. How could you, you cowardly bastard, he hissed. Ouch, the dagger's point. However, not knowing how much detail Sarah might have revealed, and not wanting to squander our friendship in a frenzy of young buck jockeying, after all, despite his carelessness in scheduling, I sailed away with a prize Helen. And moreover, had things in that pregnant moment in the shadows on the dock bloomed into romantic fruition, Maddie would indeed have had grounds for legitimate grievances with me. Thus, I chose to endure cowardly bastard with stoic sufferance. In any case, he concluded, before wheeling off to supper, don't you ever, ever, ever think of doing such a thing with Georgie. With Georgiana? Oh, please, as we now say. Georgie is a grand story in her own right. Tall, with cascading hair and a delicious little stutter, both she and Matteo have since enjoyed glorious careers, exhibiting their notable gifts to great acclaim, hers even more great than his. On the afternoon we all received our diplomas, as families waited for each graduate's name to be called, no sooner had I received my nonpareil parchment from the hands of the august professor of history and master of the college where Matteo and I had spent our upperclassmen years than Georgie rushed across in front of the entire gathering enveloping me with a huge hug and kiss. My mother, in whom a bohemian flair is mixed with Victorian rectitude, she would loudly criticize total strangers for brushing their hair on the subway. Yes, Mom was momentarily scandalized. There she stood, right next to her now newly married son and his bride, all but shouting, "Who is this flamboyant hussy with the ravishing hair indulging in such an outrageous display of inappropriate affection?" I think the philosopher von Humboldt was onto something. Insight is based on an understanding of context. Call it Weltansichten or Weltanschauung. It is essential. To wit, in this case, Georgiana, Matteo, my then bride-to-be, and I had spent many hours, happy hours together during the previous year, including a drive to a concert at Tanglewood, 90 miles away in Western Massachusetts, in said red sports car, with my fiance curled like a cat on the narrow back shelf and Georgie sitting on Mateo's lap in the passenger seat. Fortunately, no state troopers stopped us to inquire as to the designated capacity of said British racing buggy. However dramatic in this instant Georgie's hug and kiss might have appeared to the assembly, it was neither cigar nor not a cigar, just a friendly hug and kiss. A moment later, with introductions and explanations, Weltanschauung triumphed misunderstanding, and a whole chapter of life came to a felicitous close. The following evening, the bride and I decamped to Fable Europe on one of the last propeller flights, stopping on every rock in the North Atlantic to refuel, opening a whole new chapter in time. You did what?
A propeller flight.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I did one. We landed in Nova Scotia and then Ireland and then London.
Yeah, I think we did land on a rock.
My last
That's your best flight.
100 years ago.
Right. And it probably cost $175 or something, right? Well, if any of you have any thoughts or recollections or things you want to share, that would be wonderful.
Sounds like bright college years.
Yes, it was grand. I mean, there were so many wonderful people and wonderful professors, and and you didn't realize how good you had it. I mean, we were all, reading philosophy and thinking big thoughts and everything. I ran away once my freshman year, and I was hitchhiking down the Mass Turnpike with a couple of soldiers, and this guy stopped to pick us up. So I said, "I'm going to New York." Fine, fine. And then at a certain point, he said, "Well, we're turning off here now." He and his wife were sitting in the front seat. And so the soldier said, "Thanks, we'll get out, get another lift." And he put his hand on my arm as I started to get out. And he said, "I'm not sure you should be getting out here. I'll tell you what, why don't you come back and have dinner with me and my wife?" And I thought, yeah, that sounds better than standing on my highway. So I went back with him. And his wife was charming. We had a nice little supper. And they put me on the couch with a pillow and a blanket and woke me up the next morning for bacon and eggs. And he drove me back to the train to take the train back to class. And I made my 12 o'clock class. As it was. I mean, the things you did were amazing. Well, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
This actually, in a way, is nicer than that big auditorium,
Yeah.
It's sweet.
That's right. I love your description of Harvard campus. I trained in children.
Oh, wow.
My brother was a graduate at MIT.
Oh, how cool.
The only Harvard employee that has an MIT partner.